into perspective for our viewers. On that note, we're shifting focus to what's taking place in the Caribbean. The U.S. Department of Defense has announced a new military operation aimed at countering drug trafficking across the Western Hemisphere. Defense Secretary Pete Hegset has revealed the operation called Southern Spear, which is led by a joint task force and the U.S. Southern Command. In a statement, Hegset has emphasized that the mission's objectives are to remove narco-terrorists from the region, secure the U.S. homeland, and combat the drugs that are fueling the nation's ongoing opioid crisis. The operation will focus on South and Central America as well as the Caribbean. This comes amid increasing U.S. efforts to disrupt the flow of illegal narcotics into the country. With us on the broadcast is Ms. Shruti Dasgupta, International Affairs expert, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. We've also interestingly seen a statement from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He slammed certain European nations, stating that the U.S.'s war against drugs is a national security issue, and that other countries do not decide international law. What do you make of this hardline stance that the U.S. has adopted? Is this a mere ostensible reason that they're providing, or is there a larger game plan in motion?
Well, US does have a drug problem, and taking it on is a good action, but they're not doing it within their water boundaries. They're doing it in international waters where international laws prevail, and they're breaking every one of them by just killing people off, drowning boats, killing people off without providing any evidence of the crime. So they themselves are acting like the giant bully in the seas, and just because there is no other nation willing to challenge them on these grounds, and the UN has taken a complete mum stance on it, it is a very difficult situation for all of the world. We are watching what happens when you give an unaccountable power in the hands of people who don't seem to follow the rule of law. So when they are kind of challenging the European nations and saying that it's an internal problem and they don't get to talk about it, they're basically not talking about whether the European nations are against drugs or not. They're telling the European nations that do not counter our strategies in the seas, whether they are legal or not. Imagine if something like this was done by, let's say, Sri Lanka, or let's say Myanmar, or even China for that matter. US would be down with a very big anvil on their head, asking them to preserve international laws and provide evidence, and then take action within their boundary limits. But somehow these rules are not supposed to be applicable to US itself. So while I have sympathy for US and its drug issues, and I completely support all actions into countering the menace of drug abuse, right from peddling as well as supporting as well as generating and all of that. But I do not condone this effort that they have taken. They might call it Southern Spear, but how do they justify it? They're doing it in the Pacific. They did capture a couple of boats there where they have actual evidence. They are willing to capture the people alive, show you the cargo, and get the boats down. But when it is in other regions like the Caribbean and other places, they do not show you any evidence. They're just simply shooting boats down. 80 deaths at the hands of US soldiers without any accountability for the same. So this is really, really alarming. The world should look with open eyes and see what it is really doing in those seas.
Indeed, and speaking of the opioid crisis in the United States of America, we do note that the number one cause of death is fentanyl. And fentanyl, interestingly, a large quantity of it is manufactured in China. We have seen Donald Trump make statements, but have we really seen any concrete action against the Americans on that front, or are they treading very carefully as far as China is concerned, because they do need access to the rare earths, and that's why we've not seen as tough a response as we've seen in the Caribbean?
Well, his last G2, and I'm putting it in quotes, G2 meeting in China, he did say that the Chinese government has promised to take into consideration the supply of precursor chemicals into manufacturing of fentanyl. And this is China's games. They're not really sending fentanyl out. They're just making sure that the cartels that do it have access to all the precursor chemicals at the cheapest possible price. And the human price of it is paid by the other Western nations. Of course, this is a flip on the opioid game which happened with China itself
Indeed.
during its colonial times. So it is, they have kind of flipped the narrative on the West, and now the West is plagued by the China's opioid wars. Apart from this, they are not able to counter the Chinese dragon in any way because it does have their jugular vein, and they're taking counter steps on it. US per se, they had asked Japan to accelerate their processes and get a hand on the rare earth market, as well as the other